Am I on?
You're on.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. He did start something, didn't he? Thank you very much, Judy. Thank you very much, Willie. I'm going to do it right. Thank you very much.
Hey, Jim, you need to teach Judy how to play piano like your mom.
Yeah. Ding, 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 ding. Everything, that was the same beat. Are you washed in the blood and the soap? Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Everything was that same beat. Yeah. Just as I am without one plea. I mean, same beat. Well, of course, my father, the way she started playing piano, she didn't know how to play the piano, and he was pastoring a little bitty church called Castle Hill Baptist outside of Fort Worth and Azle, Texas. And his piano player got mad and quit. I probably would have got mad at him and quit too, all the things he did. And he said, Mama, you're going to play the piano. Get up here. And she started off playing. When I see the blood, she'd go, dun, 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 bum, bum, dun, 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 bum, bum, dun, dun, dun. And then before you know it, it's two fingers. Bam, 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 bum, bum. Then she's going, dun, 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 bum, bum, dun, 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 bum, bum, dun, dun, dun. And she worked into that. She started off not knowing anything, so he said, if my father said you're going to play the piano, you're going to play. That's all there is to it. And she learned how. It's really funny, just something else. We were an unusual family. I thought for the longest time we were the only dysfunctional family in the world, and I didn't even know what dysfunctional meant. But whatever it was, that was us. And my father was unbelievable. Everybody that knew him will tell you that. Craziest man I was ever around. And I ain't even saying that out of anger. That's just true. All right. We're back. And we always share with you the people that write from around the world and around the country off the 200 different towns and cities we're on TV. And through the various... we're on the internet all over the world. 24 hours a day, we're preaching about 300 messages on the internet. We're putting more on there. Mike, it's very important that we put on the 70 Weeks of Daniel, that 18-month series, and that Revelation series, because I got so many people ask for those. We need to just put them on there and say, go on the internet and watch. We got a letter we got a YouTube comment. The Tree Man 73 has made a comment. You are supposed to be after others' welfare. The Image of Christ audio clip. True Man of God. I also was at the picnic last year. The Tree Man 73. Who's the Tree Man? Huh?
Troy, maybe?
Is that Troy? I don't know.
That's my comment. That's the only tree guy
I don't know what that means. I don't know what that email means. I thought we were after others' welfare. I don't know. Y'all make things clear. I get emails from people and they go, Fred Biselfalk ran over the tree out in Oklahoma and it made me see the light. And I'm going, okay. Sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with what I'm saying. And make your emails clear. I don't know what you're talking about if you don't. Mike.
Yeah.
Kim Sinkowitz emails, would you kindly send me replacements DVD programs? $28.98, $28.99, $2,900. He wants replacements for some reason.
Okay.
Whoever, do you take care of him?
For the station, but that would be like Tom, that's like the mailing list mail out, not for the station.
Oh, it's not for, he said for programs is what he said. I don't know. It says for programs. And then Jeff Allen writes, wondered if anyone else was having trouble hearing the lessons on Grace and Truth website. I can hear commercials but can't hear Jim. Hope it's not because I don't have ears to hear. Jeff Allen. Is that fixed?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fixed, Jeff. And then Diane Ducker writes, she writes this regular. Hi, Jim, Mary, Tom, Mike, and family. Just to say thank you again for my blessings. I have such a big smile on my face when I open the mailbox and see the brown envelope. I keep you and the family in my prayers always, and please let the gentleman know that blows the kisses to the viewing audience that I say thank you. I don't know who that is. Lawrence, okay. Dealing with people, especially on public transportation, can take its toll on you. I've been reading 2 Timothy 3 regarding perilous times and the disrespect that I face every day, especially trying to get around when the knees start to ache. But I stand firm to the Word and your teachings, Jim. Let it be the will of God for you to continue to teach the hard messages that stirs up our minds, understanding, and our souls. Please tell Mary that I'm waiting to have my colonoscopy. I guess I spelled it right. It sounds frightful, but we'll get over it. Thank you again, Diane Ducker. No, it's not frightful. It's very easy. It's like falling off a log. I've had them a bunch of times. And then Mark Copeland writes, Mr. Brown, if possible, can you please email me with the titles of the books you used to refer to the traditions of men in the Old Testament to symbolize the unborn babies as a fish? Well, that comes out of one of the books I've got it out of is Alpha Beta. That's a book that's kind of difficult to find. It's called Alpha Beta. It's the alphabet of the Jews and the different letters in the alphabet and what they termed the alphabet. Aleph Beta, excuse me, Aleph Beta. And they had a term and a number for each one of the letters, and they had a meaning for it. And they called the baby a fish because it was in a lake or in the woman's womb inside the sac that breaks and when her water breaks. They were in that for 47s and for 40 weeks. And that you can get it out of Aleph Beta. But I don't know where you can find that. You can get a Hebrew book, and anytime you study Hebrew, they'll have, in some of my Hebrew books, it has in the front of it, it'll have the meanings of before you start studying the Hebrew, it'll have the meanings of have each one of the letters, Aleph, Beth, Gimel, Daleth, and so forth, on down through the alphabet. It'll tell you the numbers of them and what they mean and their conception, and go through an entire definition of them. Aleph Beth. It's a Hebrew book, or most of your Hebrew books will tell you that. I've exhausted the resources I have in my private library, and I'm not sure where to look. I speculate that the term is connected with Pisces, but again, I do not know where to look at this point. Well, not necessarily. The pagans took all of these things and paganized it. When you find the fish in the first century, and a lot of people have the fish on the back of their car, they don't know what that means. They usually get their fish. You got the fish out of Catholicism and Babylonianism, which is the Dagon or dog or the fish god. So everything has been counterfeited in Christianity, or out of Christianity. I appreciate your response. Thank you. God bless.
He's watching right now.
Okay. Well, Mark, if you're watching, look for Aleph Beth, or look at some of your Hebrew books. I've got some Hebrew. And when you're going to study the Hebrew, look for a Hebrew book that's got all these definitions in the front of them. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what this means. This is probably from Mike. This is from Todd. Todd Lisa. So that's from Todd. Y'all know Todd, don't you? Don't know Todd Lisa? Oh, Todd. Nobody knows that.
Never heard of it. Nope.
You don't remember Todd and Lisa on Saturday Night Live? Todd. And she could sound like it was Gilda Radner and what's his face? Funny. They were always drinking Tang and eating egg salad sandwiches.
Yeah, it was Gilda Ryder and Bill Murray.
Yeah, Bill Murray.
Did he always get her put that headlock?
Yeah, he'd get rid of the headlock, get rid of the cooties, you know. Get rid of the cooties. Cooties. That's cooties. That's funny. We had cooties when I was in school. That's funny. I'm going to read this Sunday. This other one. Let me move these. Gosh, I've got myself mixed up now. Y'all got me confused. It's your fault. All right. And then I've got a few letters we get from around the country. Alex Shaw writes to us from Sedalia, North Carolina. He watches us on TV there. Just says, thanks for the DVDs. Please keep me on your DVD mailing list, Alex Shaw. Well, Alex, we love you. Keep on and keep watching, brother. And Kate Garwood writes to us from Rio Rancho, New Mexico, out there in some pretty land. Out there outside of Albuquerque. That is a beautiful town. New Mexico is a beautiful state. I was telling Dave this afternoon, Santa Fe is one of the prettiest places I've ever been. You can see the Rockies in the background. It's just beautiful. And then you go north of there and you go up to Tahoe. Goodness, that's about as pretty as you get. Jim, Mary, and all family. Times are difficult, but press on. Learning a great deal and loving the series on atonement and the ones on Billy Graham. I got a call from a lady the other night, and she said, you need to quit reading out of that book. And I was reading out of Billy Graham and his friends, evidently. Quit reading out of that book and read out of the Bible. And then she said, somebody's going to die.
What is it?
Mike.
She said,
We have to die daily anyway.
okay. Yeah, but you ain't going to resurrect after this one. Not till the end of time. But as I was saying, then the lady dropped dead and I hung up. No. Well, anytime some story gets messed up, I usually say, and then they died and it was over. No, she said, she didn't know she was talking to me because when I answered the phone, I say, hello, just real soft and quiet. And she said, you tell that guy that... She said, you tell that guy that, oh gosh, what was it I said? She said, you tell that guy that he needs to get the beam out of his own eye. And I said, and so I went to my preaching voice. I said, yes, ma'am, I'll do that. Thank you very much for calling. Just to scare. And then I gave her number to Dave to call her back. And Dave called her and she wouldn't talk. I've already talked to whoever I need to. So I've learned a long time. It's no good and good to rebut these people. They're not going to pay attention. So I just went to my preaching voice, you know. Thank you very much. We'll do that. No, me. People are funny, aren't they? Thanks so much for the Father's gift to you. Enclosed is my tithe. Now that business is picking up after 3 months of nothing. Kate Garwood, New Mexico. We love you, Kate. Tell everybody we said hey out there. And we appreciate you very much. Dave, would you do me a favor before I forget? Hand this to Mike. Mike, don't let him get away with this.
Okay.
And then Shirley Pinckney writes to us from Houston, Texas.
Hey, remind everybody to keep their head down in front of this camera if they have.
Keep your head down in front of the cameras. If you have to go in and out of the bathroom, get some water. Get down real low, because when you don't and the camera's on me, it's like, it looks real.
And raising hands too. On Channel 3 one night, I've seen people raising their hands, covering you up.
Praise the Lord.
No, they were saying, can I say something? If you're going to raise your hand and say, can I say something, do like this. Then Shirley Pinckney writes, thanks for feeding me the Word of God. I have been studying from DVDs and I have learned so much. You opened my understanding. Thanks. Shirley Pinckney, Agape and Philea. We love you, Shirley. Keep on watching. It's a thrill to get these calls, and I talk to so many people. I can't even remember all of them. John Newell writes to us, "Hello, all grace and truth. Hope you continue in the well way. I thank God for half the things in my life." No, it says everything. I just thought I'd pick on you, John, if you're watching, for half the things. We had fellowship Tuesday night. 5 souls present. Lawrence and Tony showed up with donuts. Well, Tony can eat them, but the rest of you guys can't. He's skinny. He needs them. Just what I needed. Dave and Denise came from Brooklyn. Good to see Denise again. With her schedule, it's hard to make fellowship here on Staten Island, but she makes it on Sunday in Brooklyn with her husband Oswald. I'm not familiar with Oswald. I know Oswald J. Smith. He was an old Baptist preacher that was a free willer. Tonight we spend some time on gematria as it relates to schema, metaschematizo, and enduo. I picked up another great book on the subject by Frederick Bond and Thomas Lee if anyone is interested. We are looking forward to our trip to the picnic in June. All we can do is make plans and see what God has in store for us. This Saturday we will be having fellowship at Dave Rogeri's house in Pennsylvania. God willing, grace and peace to you all. Agape John. Tell everybody we said hi, John, okay? Don't tell them we said hi, John. Just tell them we said hi. Okay. All right. Then, oops, wait a minute. I read that by Mark Copeland. And Vincent Pater writes from Madisonville, Kentucky. I've been watching a number of your videos online. I've learned a lot and have been very encouraged by what you teach. I understand if you are too busy to reply. I have a few questions. Perhaps you could refer me to one of the past teachings with regards to the verses below about keeping the commandments of God. What commandments are being referred to in these verses? Is Jesus talking about just the 2 commandments in thou shalt love the Lord thy God and thy neighbors thyself? The first 4 commandments are about loving the Lord God. The second 6 commandments are the 6 commandments about loving your neighbor. If you keep the last 6, the Bible says you keep the first 4. But there's more commandments than that, and that's every time you find an imperative mood in the New Testament. Strive, agonize, entering in. That's a commandment. Humble yourselves under the hand of God. That's a commandment. It's an imperative mood. It's a command. I know it's wrong to tattoo the body, yet when telling this to others, they often reply with Leviticus 19:27, 19:19, saying then that it is also wrong to cut the edge of your beard or wear mixed clothing and eat pork and shellfish. How does this one apply to this? That's a long subject, and I'll be getting to that. The Jews tattooed themselves. God tattooed himself. Huh?
With us.
That's right. He said he's graven us in the palms of his hands. And when a man went off to war, when a young Jewish soldier went off to war, his mother would put some tattoo in her hands that would remind her of him. It's talking about the way the pagans, when it says make cuttings on your body, it's talking about when the priests of Baal jumped up and down on the altars in the 18th chapter of 1 Kings, screaming and yelling, cutting themselves, bleeding all over the altar. They think if they cut themselves and shed their blood, it would make their gods happy. It's talking about making cuttings in your skin for an idol god. It's not talking about, of course, do I believe you're supposed to have some naked girl on your arm? No. Or tattoos from top of your body to the bottom? No. Anything that's an appearance of evil. Abstain from appearances of evil. Now, if you come here and you got tattoos, I think Dave's got some old tattoos.
Yeah, way before.
We're going to make you cut them off this next week.
Japanese won't let you go swimming in their pools if you have tattoos.
Really?
Yeah.
The Japanese won't let you swim in their pools if you got a tattoo. That's funny. That's not what the Bible's talking about. And besides that, I mean, that's like saying, I got this emphysema for smoking for years, so we're not going to let you come to the church if you got emphysema for smoking for years. You know. No, that you have to look at the Bible with a wider application than what most people do. Things that are an appearance of evil, besides that, tattoos are done. What are you going to do? Say, got a tattoo, get out of the church. I think Summer's got one somewhere. A tattoo. You lived on a little island with this guy.
You know, you
Used to be a little bitty short man, and you lived on an island with this guy. Say, tattoo, tattoo. Airplane, plane, see the plane, the plane. The plane, the plane.
You know, Jim, we've got entertainment business, and you know how fast things go out of style. You've seen it, right?
Oh, gosh.
Wait till this tattoos thing becomes unhip.
Let me tell you what's going to be unhip. It's people looking like they comb their hair with a hand grenade. That's the kind of hairdo that they're going to look back at if the Lord doesn't come back 30 years from now and go, oh my God, did I comb my hair that way? Oh man, I'm so embarrassed. It's the stupidest looking thing. I got out of the shower the other day and I put mousse on my hair. That's the only thing I put on it so my hair is so thin it'll fall down. And put mousse on it and my hair was just sticking every direction. I said, Mary, can I go to church like this? This is the way they're dressing. She just started cackling. You look. Yeah, I gotta let my pants drop down below my hips. That's so dumb. You guys are going to be sorry when you get older and have kids. You're going to say, oh God, was that me?
Plus those tattoos are going to end up somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not worried about people's tattoos. Good grief. I'm worried about whether they got Jesus tattooed on their heart. Whether God's written on fleshy tables of your heart. That's my concern. Good night. I mean, you know, people don't even know what they're talking about when they say those. I'm not encouraging somebody to go out and get your body tattooed all over.
My mom said that to me. She says, you were Jehovah's Witness and you got a tattoo. She was like, your body is God's temple. I was like, well, I'm making
The
God's
temple of the Holy. It's not the temple. It's the temple of the truth.
Right.
The Holy Spirit. And it still is, even after a tattoo, it still is the temple of the Holy Spirit. And defiling the temple is when you go out and live like the devil, not when you put a tattoo on it.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to defend tattoos. I'm just saying the way people strain at a gnat and swallow a camel is amazing, isn't it?
You didn't like that, did you?
That was fun.
Bonnie Cheekwood called me. She left a message. I called her this afternoon. She's 72 years old, lives in Oklahoma City. Her husband left her about 5 years ago. They'd been married for 30 years or something like that. Came in and said, I want a divorce. Boom, he's gone. She's real gentle, real gentle. She said, I recognized the truth immediately when I heard it. She was raised a Baptist. Lived in Baptist churches. Her kids are in Baptist churches. She said she knows the preachers are lying. I said, Billy Graham is lying. Charles Stanley is lying. She said, I know they are. And she said, I know all these preachers are lying. She said, I am so glad I found you on TV. It was just so tender. And she left a message on the phone. She said, I want to know the truth about the Bible. I want to know that I'm going to heaven when I die. That was her words. And just a tender-hearted lady. I wish some of y'all ladies would call her. I've got her phone number. I made it my business just to get some of these. Would anybody call her? Okay, well, come here and take these. Anybody else want to call her? You call her. Just call her and encourage her. She just is a sweet, sweet lady. I mean, she's a dear heart. She lives in Oklahoma City. And she just talks real soft. And when she says, I want to go to heaven when I die, I want to know that I'm going to heaven when I die. I know these preachers are not telling the truth. And that just thrilled me to death to hear her say, I know the preachers are not telling the truth. She said, I am so glad I found you on TV. It's like she was just thrilled.
Where is she?
She's in Oklahoma City. She is just a gentle soul. And just tell her I told you to call. Say, this is the TV preacher, remember his congregation. And just tender-hearted woman. And loves the truth. She said, I'm just looking for the truth, that's all. It touched my heart when she said, I'm so glad I found you. And when she said, to say something so simple as, I want to know that I'm going to heaven when I die. I told her on the phone, I said, that's the things, I preach on that all the time, about if you don't have your cross, don't have a daily cross, you can't go to heaven when you die. I believe she's really the real thing. Sometimes I don't know if people are, but I said, you're old enough. She and I are about 25 days apart on our birth date. And I'm about 25 days older than her. And it was just a tender-hearted woman. She just needs fellowship. I gave her Tony Sabatini's number. And she said, I said, we have a picnic every year. She said, oh, I would love to come to that. She just was overwhelmed by the message she saw. Anyway, I just thought maybe y'all would call her. She's a gentle lady. Thank God for that. All right. Don't forget, we're on radio every Saturday morning. WNQM, can you say that for me?
WNQM, 1300 AM, Nashville.
Dave was a radio announcer. Can't you do that with more feeling, like you did it on the radio?
WNQM, 1300 AM, Nashville. Crank it up.
Crank it up. Crank it up. Crank it up.
At 7 in the morning, I'm a little more lively.
Yeah. Crank it up. When he was a rock DJ, that's what I'd say. Crank it up.
Crank it up.
We'll go down the road. I'll ask him to say something like a radio announcer, and he'll give
Days
it.
before repentance.
Yeah, this was days before his repentance, like he said. He's got that voice. Don't forget our needy people. We take care of as many people as we can that are needy. I'm talking about needy believers that are part of the ministry, that have proven themselves. We give some of them money. We give them food cards. I call them food cards. They're gift cards that you can pick up at the grocery store, at the drugstore. And you can pick up a $25, $50 card, whatever you want to give. And every one of those cards helps somebody that's really in need. I give away cards through the week. At the first of the month, I give them through the week when people are really in need. And at the first of the month, I got about 7 or 8 people. I send $75 to $100 a piece in gift cards, depending on how many I've got. And we got people here that make $800 or $1,000 a month, and they're on food stamps. And we got people right here in our midst that are not making it. And when somebody's car breaks down, it's me that's got to get it fixed. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm more than happy to help them. And I'm always looking for another car. I've got 2 people that need them. We've got one located. Don't know if it's going to work. May have something wrong with it, can't be fixed. Cost more than a car's worth. So I'm looking for a car for, well, I won't say who, for 2 people. And we can't pay a lot for them. $50 to $1,000. And $500 to $1,000, $50. Well, Lawrence got one cheaper than it.
I said if you find a $50 car.
Well, we found one cheaper than that. Lawrence got one for free. Oh, no, he got his for $100, excuse me.
Wow.
He got his for $100 and gave Paul $100 for it. And said it runs good, drove to New York, can drive back here. Has a great big fender out dented, but still works. He don't care.
Jim, I got a friend who's looking for a car. We're going to drive him around, and we're going to look for cars
Okay.
all day. Because all they can.
Well, if you run across if you run across something 800, 1,000, or 1,200, we'll offer them 1,000 if it's 1,200. And I need a couple of them right now. And we've got one located, maybe another one. I don't know if either one of them will work, but we'll find out. And Todd has located one, and I won't go in the other one. It's may have some problems, may not, but they need our help. His car broke down, and we had to help her. She has no way of having it fixed, and we have people want to drive here. And if it's too far and they don't have enough money and they need gas money, we've given gas money many times to people, and we never even want that back. We get money for gas. That don't mean somebody that's a freeloader come up, okay, Jim, give me money, give me money. You have to prove yourself to me that you are, especially when you're faithful in giving. Somebody's faithful in giving. I've got a fellow that has tithed to this ministry since 1990, every month. And if he calls and says, I want anything, he's even bought equipment for this ministry. If he says, I want anything, I say, it's yours. There's no hesitation. And whatever we have, he can have. Because, man, he has been there all the way through. And people prove themselves, and they're having a hard time, we help them. But anyway, just help the needy. I evaluate everybody that I give something to. Believe me, I evaluate them. They don't get by it. People might get by me one time, maybe two, usually not. Because I ask them a lot of questions, and if they're coming, they're supporting the ministry, they're trying, or they're working in the ministry, they're trying, that's who this is for. And help the poor. Don't forget our picnic, our annual picnic. If you're coming into town, call me. I'll give you the name of some motels here that are good rates. Come and join us, because this really will help you more than anything to meet these people here that believe what you believe. I've been telling people lately, nobody comes to Grace and Truth Ministries because they're looking for a church. Nobody. They come here because we teach the truth, and you can't stay here if that's not what you want. So when you walk in, you say Christmas is pagan. Everybody here says, that's right, this is the right place. And if you say God doesn't love everybody, everybody says, come on in. You're at home. Isn't that right? That's it. I think that's all my announcements. Well, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Rich, you want to pray for us, please? Amen. I had a lady went to a restaurant the other day, went to Mimi's, and I had gone in there before and talked to the lady, and she's a waitress, and gave her a DVD about the charismatics. She said something about, do you like Earl Murray? I said, he's a false teacher. He's a racist. She didn't know what I meant. She got resentful, walked away. We went in the other day, and I said, did you watch that DVD I gave you? She said, a couple of minutes of it. She said, I don't believe in judging people. I said, we're to judge righteous judgment. She said, well, we're not racist. I said he is a racist. And she said, well, thank you for the information. I said, I don't believe that. And I didn't believe her thank you. She didn't understand that I didn't mean that. She said, we've got black and we got all kinds of races in with Arnold Murray. She didn't even understand Anglo-Israelism, which he preaches, is a type of racism. That the white Anglo-Saxon Americans and English is Ephraim and Manasseh, and that's going to who the leaders are. That is the real Jews, and that if you're black or you're Hispanic or you're some other nationality, you can go to heaven, but you'll be second-class citizens in heaven, that the ones up ahead of everybody will be. That's Anglo-Israelism, and he believes that. It's British Israelism, and I did a series of DVDs on that, and it's racism. I don't care how you slice it. But she didn't want to know what I meant. We're not racist. We got black people in. Okay, good. Just go your way. And I went home and I started writing a paper on judging. Are we to judge? Yes. And I'm writing another paper, and I need somebody to help me type it. Marianne, would you help me do that? I've gotten in a writing mood again, so I'm going to start writing some. And it's going to connect a whole bunch of things with it. But I've learned that when people start correcting you, there's no need to defend yourself. Go on the attack. And don't get deep with them, and don't get into deep Greek words. Hit them hard. So if you don't repent, you'll die in your sin. And that's what, if they're elect, that will affect them. If they're not elect, they'll just get madder at you, and fume and walk away. It will bother the elect if you say hard, blunt words to them. And it will not bother the vessels of wrath fitted to destruction. But she wanted no explanations. America is brainwashed into believing you're not supposed to rebuke anybody or call out anybody for their sin or for their false doctrine. Just brainwashed into that. It's okay if as long as he can say Jesus with his mouth, he's going to heaven. As long as you say Jesus, you're going to heaven. Quit judging him. And she has judged them innocent. Because judge means to declare guilty or innocent. And we are to judge righteous judgment. Tell them what God said. When you condemn them for their false doctrine, you are judging them righteously. Judge righteous judgment.
30 seconds.
And if you don't separate from them, you're judging them innocent. I'm already into my paper. It's Wednesday night, and our subject is the history of Israel. I've got a little chart I drew up on the board right before service. It's a complete rundown of the Old Testament. This is all the Old Testament behind me here. That's all it is to it. It's very simple. You've got the first 5 books of the Bible. This is called Torah by the Jews. It is called Pentateuch by the Protestants. Pent means 5. It's the first 5 books of the Bible, 5 books. It's also called, the Torah means the law. It is the law of the Jews. That's what it is. Of course, in Genesis, we've got Genesis 7, Genesis 12. Abraham comes on the scene. He's in the lineage of Shem, the second-born son of Noah. Shem is in the lineage of Seth. In that 5th chapter, Genesis takes us all the way down to Noah and Shem. And Seth is the son of Adam, and Adam is the son of God. That's in Genesis 5. Genesis 5. Genesis 5. And then we have in the 12th chapter, we've got Abraham. Abraham gets the promise from God, calls him out of Ur of the Chaldees. In the 15th chapter, then Abraham is promised a son. He actually calls Abraham out. Abraham shows up in the 11th chapter, at the end of the 11th chapter of Genesis. And in the 17th chapter, Abraham is given the covenant of God. In that covenant, he says, you're going to be my people and all your descendants in a particular lineage. And that lineage will go through Isaac, Jacob, and Jacob's name will be changed to Israel. Israel. Then after you get through here, we're working our way. I've spent about 2 years on the book of Genesis. We're going to go through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. When we get into Leviticus, particularly Leviticus, and some of Deuteronomy, you're going to get in very complex laws. We won't cover every one of those laws, but we're going to skim through the top and look at some of the things in it. Then when you get over here, if you'll notice, I put a little bracket here. And I put at the top, this is the law of Israel right here. And this is the law that Israel is supposed to abide by during the time that they are a kingdom. And they're actually a kingdom. They begin to be a kingdom. The land is given to Abraham over here, and the covenant is given to him in the 17th chapter. So all these sons of Jacob, Jacob's name is changed to Israel. All these sons of Jacob end up in Egypt, between when they're sold into Egypt, they end up in Egypt, and they're sold in Egypt, and Joseph is sold in Egypt. They end up there at the end of Genesis, and then Joseph is sold in Egypt, and they're there for 400 years. I've been trying to figure out how to show. It's not as hard as it looks. So they're in Egypt for 400 years. 400. And the Exodus means to exit. They're exiting from Egypt. That's why it's called Exodus. Out. The word exit, get the word Exodus from exit. That sign over the door there. So they're going to exit Egypt. And the Levites, now Jacob's got 12 sons who's going to become the nation. The Levites are the sons of Levi. That's the third son of Jacob. So this is the laws of the Levites in the book of Leviticus. Leviticus comes from Levi. And you get into Numbers. The book of Numbers is the time period from when they leave Mount Sinai, when Moses gets the law, until this is the 40 years in the wilderness. That's what the book of Numbers is till they cross the river going back into the land. In the book of Joshua, Joshua is actually a book where Joshua, who is the son of Nun, it's more properly pronounced Nun instead of Nun, and Joshua is the son of Nun, and he will lead the children of Israel into the promised land. Moses is not allowed to because he, at one point during Deuteronomy, God tells him to speak to a rock so water will come out, and he's mad at the people, and he strikes the rock twice, and because he hits it twice, God says, you're not going into the land. Why God would make such a serious charge on that, I don't know, because he actually forgave David for murder and adultery, and he forgave Paul for being a serial killer, a mass murderer. He killed Christians for a living. When you get into Joshua, Joshua's job is to set off. He comes across the river somewhere here in this neighborhood of what is today Jordan, right here. This is Jordan. Right here is this right over here. See Jordan there? Amman, Jordan, right in here. It's just east of Israel. This is Jordan. This is Jordan over here, east of the Jordan River. We call the West Bank is west of the Jordan River. That's the part of Israel that's west of the Jordan River. There's a bank there. There's a section set off that the Palestinians want today, and they want this Gaza Strip down here, which is the old land of the Philistines. So east of the Jordan River is the land of Jordan, and that was the land of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. Manasseh was the firstborn son of Joseph, and God split Joseph's tribe into Manasseh and Ephraim. Then Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben is on the east side of the Jordan River. So Joshua is told to go into the land and to conquer these towns. He crosses the Jordan River with his armies, and they encamp at Gilgal. That's the first place they encamp. And then he goes over here, and he attacks Jericho, just below Gilgal. Attacks Jericho. And, of course, we know that the walls come tumbling down at Jericho. God fit the battle of Jericho, didn't he? In the 6th chapter of Joshua. He didn't have a fit at Jericho. He fit the battle. And then Jericho, after he went to Jericho, he went to Ai up here. And he destroyed Ai, and that's where Did somebody say something? That's where Achan found a little wedge of gold in a goodly Babylonish garment, and God killed him for taking part in that, because he said, don't take any part of anything when you go in there. So he takes this wedge of gold in goodly Babylonish garment, and Joshua calls him in front of him and said, have you taken this? He said, yes, sir. He said, fall upon him and kill him. He said, God told you. That's how serious God is. So he destroys Ai, and then they settle down, and Joshua appoints all of the land to the various tribes, who's going to live where, and gives them the borders. And that's basically what the book of Joshua is about. Joshua goes in to conquer them, then he keeps going back to Gilgal, and then as he conquers them and divides up the land, and at the end of Joshua, at the end of the book of Joshua, that's where Joshua calls the men in. While they were 40 years in the wilderness down here, they were 40 years so they could kill off all the unbelief in Israel. So when they enter in, you have to understand that they are righteous Israel that enters into the land. They're godly men. They're believing God. So when they go in there, God tells them, drive all of these pagans out of Israel. And they apostatize to some degree, even though they believe God. They don't drive them out. They're real nice people. They say, well, they're pretty good people. And they start mixing with them and intermarrying with them all over Israel. And that causes them grief the rest of their existence as a nation. And you have to keep the fact in mind, they don't drive anybody out. And they end up with cities like Jebus, which later on became Jerusalem, and Gibeah, which is just above Jerusalem. And these are pagan cities that are pagan until Israel goes in and conquers them. So Joshua divides all this up. When you get into Judges, this is where they go in and occupy the land. That's where they move in. Let's move in, man. They go in Judges, and they've got all these, some say 13 judges. We don't know exactly. Depends on if you want to count Samuel as a judge, which I believe he was. Then you get into Ruth, which is this is a lineage of Christ. This is about Boaz and Ruth, Christ. And Boaz has a lineage that goes down to Obed and Jesse and then David, and out of that comes Christ. And Ruth was a Moabite. Not going to get into that. So this is Israel as a history going back to possess the land after 400 years in bondage, going back to possess the land. In Joshua, they're going back to possess the land that was given to Abraham. And because Joseph was sold into bondage here in Genesis, and they come out in the Exodus, when you get into Exodus 12 through Deuteronomy 33, that is 40 years. Because they're exiting Egypt. They're not in Exodus very long. The 40 years is mostly in the book of Numbers. But they're exiting Egypt, and they're in from Exodus 12, that is the that's the first Passover, till you get to Deuteronomy 3, that's 40 years. 400 years here in the wilderness. 400 years in Egypt, excuse me, not 400 years. I've got it in the wrong place.
Deuteronomy.
400 years.
Deuteronomy.
33. Not 3, 30, 33. The 400 years is here at the end of Genesis, beginning in Exodus. Then here you got 40 years here from Exodus 12, Deuteronomy 33. Then they go into the land and repossess. Joshua points the boundaries. Judges is their entry into the land. When you read that first chapter of Judges, God is saying, go in there and drive them out. They go in and they don't drive them out. Then you end up over here in 1st and 2nd Samuel. The law that is given to Moses when he goes in Exodus here, when he goes in and he goes into Pharaoh, and God gives him this appointment in Exodus, the 4th chapter, to go into Pharaoh, Exodus 4th chapter, and go into Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. He goes in and tells him, let my people go. Well, they leave and they go back to the land that was given to Abraham, that they have been out of for 400 years. In 400 years, and they're over here in Egypt for 400 years, what's going to happen with all this land? It just grows up. It gets like a desert, like some desolate place, and anybody can move in that wants to move in. But it was given to Abraham long before the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Jebusites and all these ites moved in the land and took over, and they were all sun and tree worshipers. So here is the law of Israel. God says, you're going to be my people to Abraham. And I'm going to give Moses the law here when he goes on Mount Sinai. And here's the laws that you're going to have to live by. And Genesis is included with these laws in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And the law is for the time period that Israel is a nation. And you could include Joshua and Judges as part of the nation because that's where they're appointed the land boundaries. Judges is where they go in. And they have all these judges. And you've got some famous judges here. And they were ruled by judges for about 300 years. 250, 300. They were ruled by them. And you've got the first judge was Othniel. Oops, I'm getting in the wrong place. First judge was Othniel. He was the nephew of Caleb. Because Caleb was one of the only men, Caleb and Joshua were the only two men that were allowed to come in that had been at least 20 years old when they got down to Kadesh Barnea. And the fighting men refused to go in and fight what was the Anakims at the land of Anak, which later on became the land of the Philistines and later on became the land of Gaza Strip. So Othniel, then you had Ehud, and you had Shamgar. And I'll just give you some. He had a very short period, but he was still a righteous judge. And you had Deborah. And you go on down here, you got Jephthah, and you got, you have Gideon, Jephthah, Samson, and others down through here. And these are the people who ruled Israel, and they would fight the Philistines and the Midianites and so forth. So the law was given for Israel to live by when they came back to the land. The land was originally given to Abraham. They will be here 400 years. They come back, and they wander in the wilderness for 40 years to get rid of all the unbelief. And when they come in here, these are the laws they have to live by. And if you don't obey my laws, then what I'm going to do, I'm going to send 4 judgments, the sword, the famine, and the pestilence. And God had, the sword was where their enemies would come in and surround a city and cut off all supply lines. God says, if you're disobedient to me, I'll send the sword. And they'll cut off supply lines for 60 days. And you'll be starving to death, and your children will be dying, and I'll cause you to eat your children because you'll be that hungry. And that's what they did. They started eating their kids. And you know this. I've been trying to figure a way. I've divided this into like 3 sections. The law, the kingdom, the section on the prophets, and your books of poetry and some more history here. Job is the oldest book of the Bible. The book of the law, it's believed, was written by Moses, but Moses lived 1450 BC. That's about the time they left Egypt. Well, the book of Job is considered the oldest book in the Bible. Why would that be? Not the events of Job. The oldest events are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. We're talking about the oldest book because Job was a contemporary of Abraham. And Abraham's story was written by Moses around 1450. The book of Job was written somewhere around 2100 BC. And the book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, if it was written by Moses, and I believe it was, and the last chapter of Deuteronomy was not written by Moses. We know that. We know he had to have some help writing that because he dies in the 33rd chapter. So he couldn't have written that part. That's like Samuel could not have written all of Samuel because he dies in the 25th chapter of 1 Samuel. But they would have assistance in finishing books. Probably It would have been could have been Joshua. Some people say Ezra finished up the book of Deuteronomy. I don't know. Nobody really knows. There's all kind of arguments. Like I said Sunday morning, it depends on which historian you read, because you'll get all kinds of opinion. So the book of Job is considered the oldest book of the Bible. He lived sometime around the time of Abraham. If it was written by Job, which most people believe it was, that was around 2100 BC. and the book of the law was written around 1450. Now, the law was for Israel while they were a nation. Israel kept going after Baal, Grove, Shemash, Molech, Ashtaroth, all of these sun and tree goddesses, and they had all these different names in all the various nations where they were, and their names would be Hercules and Adonis and Venus and Aphrodite, and they were the same thing as Baal and the Grove and all the rest of these. Now, all the time they were a kingdom under kings. This is where they were kings, right here. Here's the kings of Israel, right here. I really want you to see this. This is the kings of Israel. Saul was the first man king. God was the first king. Saul was of the tribe of Benjamin. Wrong tribe to be king. David is the tribe of Judah. Solomon is the tribe of Judah. Rehoboam is Solomon's son. Abijah is Rehoboam's son. Asa is Abijah's son. Jehoshaphat is Asa's son. Jehoram is Jehoshaphat's son. Ahaziah is Jehoram's son. Athaliah, she marries Jehoram, tries to kill off all of her grandsons so she can be the king. She was for a while. One survives. He's taken and hidden. And Joash is the son of Ahaziah. And then Amaziah is the son of Joash. Uzziah is the son of Amaziah. Jotham is the son of Uzziah. Ahaz is the son of Jotham, and so forth. This is the Judah tribe right here, and this is the kings. This is northern Israel. This is southern Israel, southern Judah. Northern Israel, it was split because of Solomon's apostasy. You know that. And then this is northern Israel, but you didn't have to be in any particular lineage. If you could raise up an army to overthrow up here, you could be king. And that's what you have a lot up here. It wasn't a particular lineage, but northern Israel did possess through Ephraim the inheritance. Not going to go through that. Now, when you get over here to, right after Chronicles comes Ezra. Israel is scattered in the 36th chapter. Southern Judah is scattered in the 36th chapter. You can go over to 2 Kings, the 17th, 18th chapter, and you see the Assyrians coming in to scatter northern Israel in 722 BC. You can also see in the 25th chapter of 2 Kings, southern Judah being scattered, Judah scattered by the Babylonians in 586 BC. So southern Judah is scattered 136 years. Northern Israel is scattered 136 years before southern Judah. And that's northern Israel, because they kept going after all these gods. And that's the same system was brought in the church by Constantine and renamed Christ's Mass. Well, when you get over here into Ezra and Nehemiah have to do with the 70 weeks of Daniel. God gives Israel, because all the time they're a nation here, they have 70 sets of sabbatical years that they never kept. If they won't keep the sabbatical years, they'll go after other gods. And the reason they didn't keep the sabbatical years is because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7. Every 7 years they had a sabbatical year. They had to let the land lie fallow. They couldn't plant. They couldn't reap. Well, every year they had a spring crop and a fall crop planted. A spring crop and a fall crop planted. This fall crop would be reaped in the spring of the following year. When in the 7th year, they couldn't reap the fall crop of the 6th year, and they couldn't plant a crop in the fall. They couldn't reap the crop that was planted in the 7th year because they didn't have one planted. So they actually went a 2-year period without a crop. Do you see that? Went a 2-year period. They said, we're not going to do that. We'll go find us another fertile god, fertility god. So they never kept those sabbatical years, and that's why God measures out when he has the beast, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, to come in. He has them scatter them all over the face of the earth. Northern Israel scattered 722 BC in the 17th, 18th chapters of 2 Kings. Southern Judah scattered in the 25th chapter and in the 36th chapter of 2 Chronicles. They're scattered all over the earth. They're scattered. They're brought back at the end of time. At the end of time, particularly when the from 1517 to 1917, they were controlled by Arabs, particularly Ottoman Turks. You know how long I've been teaching this? I sold real estate for years, and Eric wouldn't even know that I taught this stuff back for years before I even met his mother. I traveled all over America. Didn't know this much, but I taught the 70 weeks of Daniel. I taught the history of Israel. I've been teaching this for for 40 years at least. I've been studying for 50 years. I've been actually teaching for 45 years. I studied for about 5 years or 6 or 7. Then I started trying to teach, and I stumbled on myself a lot. But I've spent 55 or 60 years thinking about it, because I thought about it when my father's friends would try to preach it, and they were fumbling, stumbling, didn't know what they were doing. Now, when you get over here, Esther is the part of the history. That's why I drew an arrow over here. Esther is during the reign. This is about Esther, who was the wife of Ahasuerus, who is actually Xerxes, the father of Artaxerxes, who gives the third and the fourth decrees concerning the 70 weeks of Daniel. Don't want to go into that, too much to it. So Esther belongs here in history during the Persian kings. Actually, it's after they're carrying away, but it's the Persian king, comes after Chronicles, but it's when the Persians take over. After Babylon. Babylon is overthrown by the Persians. So it's during the Persian Empire. The book of Esther is a part of history and a part of prophecy. Nehemiah and Ezra are both prophets, but they're part of the history. They're the ones that give the decrees. In Ezra, you got the first 3 decrees for rebuilding the temple. In Nehemiah, the 2nd chapter, you've got these were given to Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, given by them to the Jews to rebuild the temple and to supply the temple. 2nd chapter of Nehemiah was the beginning of the 70 weeks. That's the decree to rebuild Jerusalem. And Daniel 9:25, after the 70 weeks, is given in the 24th verse of Daniel 9. From the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem to Messiah the Prince, that'll be Jesus, coming into Jerusalem, will be 7 weeks, 62 weeks, that'll be 483 years. And there'll be 7 years to go at the end of time. So 69 weeks are fulfilled here. Didn't mean to get that complex. Excuse me, please. Now, these are the poetic books here, right here. Solomon wrote these first 3 poetic books. Not Psalms, excuse me. Psalms, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. They're listed in this manner. I don't know why I got them like this. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. Song of Solomon was written when he was young. Proverbs written probably in middle age. Song of Solomon is a love story between Christ and the church. It was considered a very private story. It was not allowed to be read to the Jewish children. It was so graphically romantic. Proverbs was written in his middle age. Ecclesiastes was written in Solomon's old age. And he says, I've learned by the time I get old, everything is vanity and vexation of spirit. It was also called the Canticles. This is books of poetry. When you read the Psalms, you have to read the Psalms in connection with. Psalms is either going to be Moses or David. You can't read the Psalms. Most of the Psalms was either written, the Psalms are written by David's song leader and director, Asaph, and Moses. So when you're reading the Psalms, you have to study the Psalms in conjunction with Moses' life. Well, actually, from Exodus to Deuteronomy, and all the trials that he went through. That's how you read Psalms. You read Psalms in conjunction with David's life from the 16th chapter of 1 Samuel through the end of 2 Samuel. Because that's the time period that David is king, and when he's being pursued by Saul, when he's being forsaken by Ahithophel, his chief counselor who defects to his son Absalom, who's trying to kill David. When you read those, the 51st Psalm is talking about Ahithophel. Some of these Psalms will be talking about Absalom seeking David, and it applies to our life when you begin to realize when people come after you who you're best friends, your own son wants to kill you like Absalom. When your family turns against you like Absalom turned against David. When Ahithophel was David's dearest friend in the 51st Psalm, and David said, in the 55th Psalm, and he says we had sweet fellowship together. We went to the house of God together. He said, and I loved you, dear brother. And he said, your words were smooth as butter, but they are drawn swords against me. That's heartbreaking to have a dear, close friend, and you're really trying with all your heart to preach the Word of God and tell the truth. And I've had people here in the church, and I loved them with all my heart and soul. And they start coming up behind me like Joab to Abner, and they put a knife under my fifth rib. It's devastating. I'm not even angry at people. I'm just brokenhearted when they do it. It makes me want to sit down and weep and cry. And they start accusing me of things that's not true. And they accuse David. That's a very heartbreaking thing. And when you read the Psalms, I couldn't read the Psalms till I got older and actually understood it. And particularly until I understood the law, the history of Israel, and what all these kings went through, what David went through. Until you read what David went through in 1st and 2nd Samuel, start in the 16th chapter where David is anointed king by Samuel, and go to the end of his life in 2 Samuel, the last chapter there. When you read 1st and 2nd Samuel about David, read over here about Moses, then you'll understand the Psalms. You must do that. What are all these prophets? This is the entire Old Testament. If I've skipped something, please forgive me. This is all these prophets. Now, there were more prophets than these. There was Ahijah, who prophesied to Jeroboam. Every one of these kings had a prophet. Jeroboam's son got sick, and Ahijah, he had his wife disguise herself. She put on some witch's costume, I guess. And she went down to Ahijah, and God knew what he was doing. And Jeroboam he apostatized from Israel and introduced golden calf Israel to keep the people from going back down there and joining Rehoboam in southern Judah when Rehoboam had repented. So he invents golden calves to get the people to come up there, and he didn't even tell them to worship the golden calf. He told them to worship the golden calf worship Jehovah in the form of the golden calf. That's like the preachers today. We don't want you to worship God in the form of all these idols you serve, your cars, your houses, your things, your stuff. Where was I? Ahijah. So he has Ahijah's, Jeroboam has his wife. Jeroboam's son gets sick, deathly ill. And he has his wife disguise herself. She goes down to down to Ahijah's house. And Ahijah's sitting there and says, he's not even looking at her. He just hears her come in. He says, "Come in, wife of Jeroboam. You go back and tell Jeroboam his son is going to die." She's just standing there shocked at the door. Doesn't know what to do. So she goes back and tells him he's going to die because of the golden calf worship he brought in there. Every one of these guys had a prophet. There were a lot more prophets than just these guys here. You had Shemaiah. He was a prophet. He's the one that told Rehoboam, after Rehoboam had taken some bad advice from his high school friends, his buddies, that said, "You tell them that you're king of Israel and you're going to be tougher on them than your father was. Your father may have chastised them with whips. You're going to chastise them with scorpions." To chastise with whips was a term mean to overtax them, but Solomon was building the temple. That's why he overtaxed everybody. He wasn't trying to get the money. So when they find this out, the 10 northern tribes go north. They take Rehoboam's commanding general, say, you go north, we'll serve you. You'll be our king. And that's what Jeroboam does. Well, the prophet that comes to Rehoboam amasses his army and says, we're going to attack northern Israel. And Shemaiah, the prophet, comes to Rehoboam and says, no, don't you do that. This is of God. God split the nation. He promised Solomon is going to split it, but not during his kingdom, after he was dead. And he split the nation because of Solomon's apostasy. So Shemaiah, he's a prophet. None of these guys, and many more, they're not listed in these. These prophets here, you got 4 here. 4, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. Hosea's not in that, excuse me. Daniel. These are called major prophets along with Moses. It's not because I said they were major prophets. This is what they call them in a seminary when you go and learn from some professor. They call them major prophets. Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. That's what they call the major prophets. Mainly because they wrote big, thick books. Now, I don't know why Daniel is a major prophet and Zechariah's not a major prophet, because Zechariah's got 12 chapters and Daniel's got 12 chapters. Now, I don't know. Let's go where they classify them. Maybe they think the 70 weeks of Daniel, all the prophecy about the beast in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8, and the 70 weeks in Daniel 9 is more important. I don't know. So these are the major prophets. Isaiah prophesies to northern Israel. Jeremiah prophesies to southern Judah. Ezekiel is prophesying around 597. He was taken away believed he was taken away in the second captivity of the carrying away of southern Judah. Southern Judah had 3 deportations, 605, 597. These were peaceful deportations where they were carrying from Judah peacefully people off into Babylon. Not going to go into why, other than the fact that Israel wasn't being obedient to the treaty they had with Babylon. They would pay tribute. Tribute money was protection money. Same thing that they do in Chicago when the outfit sends men around, or the mafia in New York sends men around to collect protection money. We'll be your king. You will obey our laws, and whenever you don't obey our laws, you're in trouble with me. That's what Nebuchadnezzar's telling them. Israel, during this time, they were running off to Egypt to Pharaoh, tried to get Pharaoh to be their buddy and their pal, and they had an agreement with Babylon as well as God. They didn't keep their agreement to Babylon or God. Ain't no wonder Nebuchadnezzar attacked them. Where was I? Oh, okay, 597. That's when Ezekiel was believed to carried over into captivity. Remember, captivity and bondage are 2 different things. The captivity is in Babylon, and once in a while I'll say bondage, but y'all know what I mean. The captivity is in Babylon when southern Judah is carried over to Babylon and northern Israel is carried into Assyria. The bondage is in Egypt. Bondage in Egypt, they were never free. They were freed after just a few years in Babylon. They were let go. Their bonds were cut. They were let out of prison. And the Jews began to take over there. But you know what? They began to take over in Egypt even when they were in bondage. They multiplied so fast in that first chapter of Exodus, the Pharaoh says, we got to do something. We got to kill all the males that come out of the womb. And the midwives said, well, these are very quick women. They deliver their babies fast before we can get there. They were afraid of God. 586 was the absolute final solution. 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar came in and leveled the temple, just down to the ground, burned it to the ground, everything to the ground, put all the stones out, plowed it up and sowed salt in it so nothing would grow there. And it grew up into weeds, and they were in Babylon for 70 years. Then the Jews they're given laws by these Persian kings in Ezra the 1st chapter, Ezra the 6th chapter, Ezra the 7th chapter, to go back and rebuild the temple. The 7th chapter was the third decree to give supplies for the temple, to take priests back to the temple. And then the 4th decree, Nehemiah, 2nd chapter of Nehemiah, Artaxerxes gives Nehemiah the decree to go rebuild the city. And that's the beginning of the 70 weeks. Now, Hosea was a contemporary of Isaiah. Joel was a contemporary of Isaiah. These men, Amos was a contemporary of Isaiah, or at least back in that neighborhood of Isaiah. Some of these prophets, we don't know exactly. They have approximate dates. You can read in the first part of their books, and you'll see, when you read in the first part of the books, it'll tell you who they're prophesying to. When you get to Amos, he's prophesying to everybody. Jeremiah's prophesying to everybody. You start about the 44th chapter, and it'll say, against the Gentiles, against, concerning the Moabites, against the Ammonites, against Babylon. He'll tell you he's going after everybody. And it's because these people they're going after either polluted Israel, they're going after the people around them that polluted them, and they're going after Israel for partaking in what they polluted them with, going after the sun and the tree gods, which was Christmas or Christ's Mass. And when you can read through these books, you can see that. You get on down here to Micah, Nahum. Nahum preached against the same people that Jonah preached to. He preached to Nineveh. He said he was the burden of Nineveh. It is believed that Habakkuk may have been the man in 2 Kings, the 20th chapter, that came in to Manasseh, son of Hezekiah. It's believed that it may have been Habakkuk who came in and said, because you've been the wickedest king that's ever lived in Israel, and you caused your children to pass through the fire, and you worship the sun and the moon and the stars, you've raised up an Ashtaroth in the temple of God. God's going to wipe Jerusalem clean as a man wipes a plate, turning it upside down, that whosoever hears of it, both his ears shall tingle. It's believed that was Habakkuk. Phew, what words. Love Habakkuk. Zephaniah preaches about, in that first chapter, about the Babylonian armies coming down into Israel and coming into the fish gate. They come in and they just come running over Jerusalem. The fish gate, here's Jerusalem. Which side of Jerusalem do you think the fish gate would be on? It was on the west side, because they did most of their fishing. They certainly didn't fish in the Dead Sea. There was no fish there. It was a salt sea, just like Salt Lake. You can lay down in the Dead Sea and just float. You won't sink. It's got so much salt in it. The buoyancy in it is such. They wasn't fishing there. They were fishing over here. The fish gate would be on the west side. When they fished, they brought it over here. And at each one of the gates, they sold certain things at each gate. They sold dung at one gate. They'd sell sheep at another gate. They'd sell fish at another gate. So that was on the west side of Jerusalem. That's what Zephaniah is talking about. Haggai and Zechariah, these two prophets, everything that was said by these prophets, Obadiah was preaching against Edom. That's the descendants of Esau. Edom was south. Here it is right down here. Their capital city was Petra. That was a mountain made out of rock. It had a narrow passageway going in there. And they said in that book of Obadiah, we dwell with the eagles. We dwell among the stars. We're up here where the eagles gather on top of this rock mountain. A little passageway that lets only about 2 to 3 people in here. We can't be conquered. And they all got drunk one night. Nobody's watching the gate. And the Nabateans, these were descendants of Ishmael. While all of the people in Petra were drunk, they all just marched in there 2 at a time through this passageway. Said, you're all under arrest. When you say I can't be conquered, God will just make you get drunk one night and somebody else sneak in and rob your whole household. Won't he? What fools. Then Haggai and Zechariah. Haggai and Zechariah, they were prophesying in the book of Ezra when the decrees were given to rebuild the temple. And let me write it over here. When Babylon carries Israel away in 586, BC, Babylon falls to Persia in 539 BC. And then in 538 BC, Cyrus is the king of Persia. And in 538, he gives the decree to rebuild the temple. And that's because the Spirit of God enters his heart by the Spirit of God. Israel is over here, captive in Babylon, under the rule of the Persian Empire, under the rule of Persians. What is going to cause Israel to be delivered? As the book of Zechariah says in that 4th chapter. Not by might. You'll not be delivered by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. That's not a whoopee Pentecostal verse. That is about the Spirit of God coming upon Cyrus and saying, give a decree for Israel to go back and rebuild the temple that was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. He says, I have an idea. Let's let Israel go back and rebuild their temple. And Cyrus is called the anointed of the Lord because he delivers Israel. Well, they start building and they get all kinds of flack in 536. 2 years later, 536 BC. 2 years passes. And a man rises up named Tatnai. And he says, Israel is being a rebellious city. They're rebuilding their temple. And he's over here in Jerusalem. And he's running around saying, they're rebelling. I'm going to tell you. And he runs back and tells the king of Persia, who is Darius at that time, Cyrus has died. And Darius is king of Persia at this time. Not here. When they go over here, they quit building for 16 years. And that takes you to 520 BC. The first year of Darius was 522 BC. Darius is the second king of Persia. Well, actually, third king, but the second we're interested in. Cyrus had a son, and he was kind of, it wasn't worth nothing, Cambyses, and he's not worth mentioning. Darius was a general. He was so powerful in battle that he just simply was such a charismatic leader. They said, we want you to be king. And that's what they would do with these great charismatic generals like General Dwight D. Eisenhower. That's the only reason he became president. He looked like everybody's grandfather, and he commanded all the forces in Europe. When MacArthur, who commanded the Pacific Theater, when he commanded that, he was a little nutty. MacArthur was a wacko, I don't know if you know that. When Truman, after the war, they turned over Japan to MacArthur, and he rebuilt it and actually gave him this stock market that's bigger than our stock market. After a while, they built it up. And then he was still commanding the forces when he was over there in Korea. And he was a warmonger. If him and Patton had got together, they'd have tried to destroy the world, you know. We want war. We're going to kill all the commies in the world. And MacArthur said he was going to drive of course, China was communist. After World War II, when a war is over, you divide the pieces of the pie. South Korea was given to the Allies, which is, believe it or not, which is America, Russia, Italy, England, France, and North Korea was given to the Axis, what was actually not the Axis, it was given to Russia, excuse me. South Korea was given to America, North Korea was given to Russia. East Berlin was given to Russia, West Berlin and West Germany was given to America. And South Korea was given to America, North Korea given to the Russians or to the communists. That's why he ended up over there fighting. And it's all about war, you know. Well, when the North Koreans came down, they had the backing of China, which was on their border, and they had the backing of Russia, which is on their border. And the Yalu River separates Korea from China. And MacArthur said, I'm going to drive those commies, those gooks, I'm going to drive them across the border I'm going to go in there and drive them up to Kremlin. Except he didn't say it that nice, you know. It's cursing him. And Truman was, I like Harry Truman. He's the most plain-talking president we ever had. Just kind of a simple man. Just wasn't a hustling president, just a guy. One of the writers said somebody would be driving along the street, say, Mr. President, he'd just run out there and lean on their car and run along beside their car. Yeah, what can I do for you? You need to talk to him in the car. You know, he's a plain man. Wasn't handsome, didn't have a great personality. But I saw in a special that he was in this special and he was out in the airport. He was taking off. He had told MacArthur, we're not going to go into China and not going to go in Russia. He said, I'm going in there and I'm going to drive those commies up to Russia and drive them up to Moscow. And he's going to go in there and attack. See, generals think they can do anything. They thought that in the ancient world. Well, Truman went out to the airport and I saw this film of him. One of the reporters said, where are you going, Mr. President? And he said, I'm going over to Korea to fire that prima donna. And he flew over there and fired MacArthur because he was a wacko. He wanted to get us in a big war so he could fight and have lots of glory if he went down and fighting, you know. They like that. Like I say, Patton liked that. He wanted to kill. This is my job. Let's kill.
Rock and roll.
Yeah, rock and roll. So that's what they are. They're the same thing as rock stars. I worked a lot of those militaries when I was in pop music. They're like gods. Especially a 4-star general is like when one walks in, the 1 stars, the brigadiers go, you think they're going to start saluting. Like, just the craziest thing I've ever seen. I've seen 4 stars drunker than skunks. But anyway, I don't know where I was. Generals. All right. We was talking about fighting, I guess. Darius. Darius was a mighty general. And they said, we want him. So he rose to the top in 522 BC, and they haven't done anything on the temple for 14 years. When in 520, in the book of Ezra, God says, I'm going to raise up these 2 men, Haggai and Zechariah, and I want you to tell these people to quit sitting down on their bottoms and get back busy building the temple that you started in 538. You stopped in 536 because you got all this flack. So Darius is the king here, and Zechariah prophesies for 3 years. Excuse me. Haggai prophesies for 3 months. Haggai. Telling the people, you're dwelling in your sealed houses and the temple of God is lying waste. He doesn't have a temple here in Jerusalem. Haggai and Zechariah are in Jerusalem. You got to keep these guys in their right places. Ezekiel, Daniel are carried away into captivity. They end up in Babylon. Jeremiah finds honor in the eyes of Nebuchadnezzar. His commanding general Nebuzaradan says to Jeremiah, we'll bring you to Babylon and give you houses and land. You can have anything. You tried to tell these people to quit being treacherous and traitors towards us and towards their God. They weren't only treacherous towards God, they were treacherous towards who had they bonded with and told them to pay tribute money to protect them, and they ran off to Egypt. And Nebuchadnezzar said, I don't like that. Jeremiah said, I will stay here in Israel while all the rest of Israel is being carried away. And Nebuchadnezzar carried away all of the artificers in brass and wood, the men who were worked at making swords and plows and everything, and he left the poor people in Israel. He didn't carry them away, and Jeremiah stayed over there with them. He said, I'll stay here. So Jeremiah is in Israel. Ezekiel and Daniel are over in Babylon. These different prophets are prophesying during Israel's history, and Haggai and Zechariah are prophesying concerning the rebuilding of the temple, saying, get back busy. And they get busy, and in 520 they go back to building, and 4 years later is 516 BC, and they finish the temple in the book of Nehemiah. Finished temple. Excuse me. They finished the temple in Ezra. They finished the temple in Ezra in 516. That's exactly 70 years from when they were taken away in 586 BC by Nebuchadnezzar. You see that? And Malachi prophesies sometime after this, and he prophesies about Israel offering sacrifices of lambs that are lame and blind. He simply reiterates what all these other prophets have said. This is the Old Testament right here. It's divided up into here, the history of Israel. Here's the rebuilding of the temple and the city. Esther is a part of the Persian Empire. Xerxes is the king. When Haman tries to kill all the Jews, and Esther's the king of, Esther's uncle is Mordecai, and Mordecai goes to Esther and says Haman's going to try to get all the Jews killed, and so she goes to King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes is another name for him, and he gives a law that they can defend themselves and so forth. And they win, and they call that Purim, the Feast of Purim. Now, and this is the poetic books. Remember, Psalms you have to study. You have to study Psalms. You must study 1st and 2nd Samuel, particularly when David starts in 16th chapter through the end of 2nd Samuel, because David dies at the end of 2nd. He actually dies in the 1st chapter of 1st Kings, but any activity of David ends at the end of 2nd Samuel. And then you have to study Moses and look at the superscription on top of the Psalms. The superscription is the words above the Psalms, and those are in the inspired Word of God. Then you're in your Bible. So they finish up the temple. So everyone has a place. They're over here in Israel. Zephaniah and Habakkuk are definitely in Israel. They're prophesying while Israel's a nation. Nahum and Micah and Jonah are prophesying while they're a nation. Most of these guys are prophesying in northern Israel. Obadiah is prophesying against Edom, which is the descendants of Esau. And Amos is prophesying to many people, to the Philistines, to Israel, to Jerusalem. Joel is prophesying back at the time of Amos and Hosea. Hosea, remember, prophesied against Ephraim, northern Israel. So he had to be a contemporary of Isaiah. He was a contemporary of Isaiah. And Ezekiel and Daniel, they're over in Babylon. So you got to keep these prophets. What we're going to do as we go through this study is going to place where I'm going to teach. I've been going through Genesis. We're going to go through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. I thought of this tonight to set this up this way. Does this help? No. Set it up, the law. Here's the law you got to live by while you're a nation. And these prophets are going to prophesy against you because you went after these other gods. And they're going to prophesy the destruction of Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And there'll be a man rise out of that, and he'll be called the man of sin, king of fierce countenance, son of perdition, and so forth. Some people call him the Antichrist, but that really doesn't apply. You're Antichrist if you deny Christ, if you say God's word isn't true. Even now are there many Antichrists, 1 John, the 2nd chapter tells us. Now, this is basically Old Testament right there. That's basically it. Can you see that to a great degree? After you get through Chronicles, when Israel's carried away, that's the destruction. At the end of that book is the destruction of southern Judah. You get into the first prophets, the first decrees given to restore the city. But that's years later. That's 40-something years later after it's destroyed, or not to restore the city, but restore the temple. And then in 444 BC, the decree is given to Nehemiah to rebuild the city and so forth. So you got these sections. That is Old Testament, basically. Now, how much time do I have? All right. Boy, that's covering a lot of territory there. I feel like I've helped you see this better. I got to get ideas. Sometimes I think about this stuff and get ideas and say, how can I explain this to everybody? If you write this down, you'll begin to see it. You say, I already understand that. Then I'm learning it as I go along. I'm learning better how to explain it to you. Because you've heard me say it before, don't mean you know it. If you do, what was the dates of the first, second, third, fourth decree, and what kings gave them? When did it start? When each one of them happened? What did they decree when they decreed them? And etc. Why were they decreed? And you know that everything about Christmas is about what I put on the board. Everything. Christmas is Christ's Mass. It's Roman Catholicism, which is Babylonianism, which is fire and tree worship, which is what Israel got involved in and why he scattered them. And he scattered them and he said, I'm going to call my people by another name, Gentile church. That's what he's going to do. Let me get me a drink of water. And I have spent 56 years studying the history of Israel. And I continue to learn about it all the time. You may hear me say something I hadn't said before. It's because I learned it. I don't quit studying. And somebody say, you study? You still study? Well, yeah. I don't understand that kind of a question. No, I learned everything years ago. I have some people write to me, they'll call me and say, all right, I looked at all these tapes you sent me. I already got this down. Send me some more. How long have you been getting DVDs? Oh, about 10 years. You've learned all that? You mean, in 56 years, I haven't learned it all, and you've learned it? Evidently, you hadn't heard everything on the DVDs, on the tapes. Now, where we are, we're going into, we've already gone through, we're in Genesis. We're going to go all through this history. If God lets me live long enough, we're going to go from one end of the Old Testament to the other. We teach on the history of Israel once a week. I'm covering a lot of territory. I'm going to cover all I can because I want you to see this. I'm not up here to get glory. If I was, I wouldn't preach to a few people. I've gotten a lot of glory standing before crowds in coliseums and standing up in front of 1,000 people, sometimes 15, 20,000 people. That's where you get glory. That's not what I'm doing. I want you to understand the Bible. I really want you to understand it, where you can talk it, where you can see this timeline, where you can see these characters. As we go through, we'll place these prophets over here in Israel where they belong. If I'm in 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, or 1 and 2 Kings, that's where you're going to find most of them because they really get in apostasy in 1 and 2 Kings and 1 and 2 Chronicles. And we'll put all these prophets where they belong in here. We'll put the dates on them, put their names, and who they're prophesying to and why they're prophesying. It's all the same story. People say, you keep repeating yourself. Hosea, Joel, and Amos, they repeated themselves over and over. God kept repeating himself over and over and over, saying, don't do that. Don't do that. I told you not to do it. If you do that again, I'm going to spank you. Why do you keep repeating yourself to your kids? Huh? I had a couple come in here and they said, you repeat yourself. Well, you don't understand repeating yourself because you don't have any kids. If you have any kids, you're certainly going to understand it, aren't you? Huh? You ever have to repeat yourself? Daily. Daily. I had a band back when I was in my sin, and I had to tell them every time we stopped, check the tires and check the oil. Every time. They were brilliant on the guitar and on the piano. But they live their heads up in a cloud. Oh, well, I checked it a month ago. No, now. Every time I pull up into it, I'd say, check the oil, check the tires, hit the tires. We had a stick, you'd hit the tires. I'd say, check everything. You have to tell bands every day what to do. Do you know you have to tell employees every day what to do because they know what to do and a lot of them will not do it? They just won't. God has to say, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. I said don't do that. Hey, I'm going to send famine, pestilence, sword. That was God's spankings he was hitting them with. And then when he has Babylon come in, he says, go to your room. That's what Babylon was. Carries them away. Stay over there 70 years. I'm going to replenish the land because you never kept these sabbatic years. Then I'm going to bring you back, okay? Don't go over there to Egypt. If you go over there, I'm going to have you killed. I want you over here. I'm not forsaking you. I'm getting you out of the land because you won't leave the ground alone. That's what he was doing. You won't leave the den alone. You got stuff everywhere. Get in your room. That's what God was saying. It don't mean you disinherited your children because you sent them to your room. Just because he put them in Babylon, he did not disinherit them. He said, you won't keep my covenants or my commandments, but I won't forsake them. I'll spank you and put you over there. If everybody had gone over there and come back the way he said, which he didn't have planned, everything would have been hunky-dory. But they wouldn't listen. In the 29th chapter of Jeremiah, he said, go over there, build houses, buy your house on FHA, HUD, and go over there and raise children and plant gardens. You're going to be there 70 years. Now go do it. And then I'm going to call you out. But you know why they did what they did? They didn't believe God. Why do we do what we do? We don't believe God. Why do we sit and fret and worry all the time when he's declared the end from the beginning? From ancient times, everything are not yet done. When he works all things after the counsel of his own will, why do we worry and fret? When he says, lo, I'll be with you all the way to the end of the world. We don't believe God when we fret and worry. I'm glad I'm old and I've quit fretting and worrying very much. I very seldom worry over anything. Something happens, the roof caves in. I say, look at that, the roof caved in. The only time I'm nervous and talk fast is when I'm on prednisone. That's the only reason I put all this stuff on the board tonight. I'm on prednisone. You know, that'll make you do that. You know that, don't you? It drives you nuts. Now I'm glad I did. At least when I'm on prednisone, I can teach a lot more things, you know. Had a little bit of bronchitis a few days ago, and I thought I'd better get on this. All right. Now, where we are, we're at the end of Genesis. We're going to go all the way through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Then we're going to the Kings. Actually, I usually say the Kings is 1 Samuel through 2 Chronicles. You can actually place Joshua, Judges, with the Kings because Joshua is dividing up the land. Judges are going in to invade the land and possess the land that was given to Abraham in Genesis. And then you go into their becoming a kingdom again. But Samuel is ruling. Samuel is the mouth or the voice of God to Israel when you go into 1 Samuel. They're a kingdom. But Samuel says, Samuel is the prophet. The prophet was the voice of God upon the earth, and God was their king, and his words came through the prophet. And then the people get to griping and complaining about Samuel in the 8th chapter. God says, and they say, give us a king, and he gives them a king, Saul, in the 9th chapter, and he's a bad king. And he comes out of the wrong tribe, and God appoints him out of the wrong tribe on purpose, doesn't he? Because God's got a sovereign, righteous way of doing things because he's going to have Israel fall so the Gentiles will come to his light, isn't he? Oh, once you see this picture, y'all beginning to see this whole picture. It's a picture, isn't it? It's a mosaic. I love this book and I love the way God's painted it. 50th chapter. We've already gone through Israel. We've gone through Genesis, Adam and Eve, eating whatever the fruit was, pomegranate, apple, banana, we don't know. And their fall in the 3rd chapter, Cain in the killing Abel in the 4th chapter, the flood, 6th and 9th chapter, up through Abraham and comes on the scene, 11th chapter, 12th chapter, getting the covenant, 13th chapter, Lot going down to Sodom, 14th chapter, the battle of the kings, 15th chapter, God promising Abraham a son that'll come out of his loins. 16th chapter, he helps Hagar with God, help God's promise with Hagar. 17th chapter, he gets the land. The land's given to Abraham and Isaac in the 17th chapter, given to Jacob in the what chapter? What chapter does God give the land to Jacob? I just thought I'd have a quiz here. Does anybody remember?
28.
28. Thank you. 28 chapter. Thank you. Does anybody know what happened in the 27th chapter? Huh?
Ladder.
No, that was in the 28th chapter. Yep, he stole it from his brother. That's right. And what happens in the 32nd chapter?
His name is
Wrestling, and his name's changed to Israel. Thank you, guys. And in the 35th chapter, does anybody remember what happens? Rachel dies. Benjamin's born. Yep, Benjamin. Gosh, y'all are getting this, aren't you? And when does Joseph come on the scene? What chapter? 37th chapter. That's right. And what happens in that 37th chapter? Sold into Egypt. Why? Because he's wearing a coat. Because he's wearing a coat. He's got on a sport coat. And they say, we want a sport coat. He got the inheritance. That's right. And what happens in the 39th chapter? Gone to Egypt. And where is he in Egypt? What? He's what? Potiphar's house. That's right. In Potiphar's house, what happens? Wicked wife tries to seduce Joseph. And then what happens to Joseph? Prison. And that's what chapter? That's 39 and 40. That's right. And then what does he do in the 40th chapter? He interprets the butler and the baker's dream. And then what happens in that 41st chapter? Brought out of prison, interprets Pharaoh's dream, and then he's set up as number one in Egypt. And we won't go through the stories of his brothers. And after all the stories of his brothers, comes time, Joseph calls his brothers to Egypt. He reveals himself to him. Do you remember where he reveals himself? What chapter? 45, exactly. Did you read that? 45th chapter reveals himself. He said, I am Joseph, and their mouths dropped to the floor. And then he calls his father over, brings him over, and there's 70 people come with him. And then we see that the covenant is given to the son of Joseph in what chapter? 48. He's close to it. And in the 49th chapter, he calls all of his sons around. Jacob calls them around. It's time for him to die, and he dies. And we're at that point right now in going into the 50th chapter. And he dies, and Joseph fell upon his father's face, verse 1, chapter 50, and wept upon him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. This is a great process. It wasn't just something simple. And the physicians embalmed Israel. Notice Jacob is called Israel. He embalms Israel. Let me give you something on embalming. The method of preparing mummies. Let me move this over here while I read it, and I'll move it back. The method of preparing mummies in ancient Egypt has been elaborately described both in Herodotus, 286, and the order Siculus, 191. And in the main, the accuracy of their descriptions has been confirmed by the evidence derived from the mummies themselves. They'd go and examine the mummies. According to the most expensive process, which cost 1 talent of silver or 250 pounds sterling. That's a lot of money. The brain was first extracted from the nostrils by means of a crooked piece of iron, the skull being thoroughly cleansed of any remaining portions by rinsing the drugs. Then through an opening in the left side made with a sharp Ethiopian knife of agate or of flint, the viscera were removed from the abdomen, being afterwards purified with palm wine and the infusion of aromatics, or the guts. Next, the disemboweled corpse was filled with every sort of spicery except frankincense, and the opening sewed up. After that, the stuffed form was steeped for 70 days in natrum, or subcarbonate of soda, obtained from the Libyan desert, and sometimes in wax and tanning bitumen, also being employed in the later times. And finally, on the expiration of that period, which was scrupulously observed, the body was washed, wrapped with linen, bandages smeared over with gum, decorated with amulets, sometimes with network of porcelain bugles, covered with a linen shroud, and in due course transferred to a mummy case. This is out of Wilkinson's Manners and Customs of Ancient Egyptians, Volume 3, page 471, edition 1878, in Rollins Herodotus, Volume 2. The embalming process occupied about 30 days, while the mourning continued 72 days, the first number, 70, being 7 decades of 10 weeks of 7 days, and the second, 12 times 6 equals 72, the duodecimal calculation being also used in Egypt. If the 70 days of the Greek historian during which the body lay in natrum be viewed as the entire period of mourning, a sense which the words, and they give you Greek words here, will bear through Kalish somewhat arbitrarily but unconvincingly pronounces it to be included, and they go into some Greek syntax and so forth. Now, let's read on here, and I'll give you something else on this. I'm going to give you about the funeral procession when we get to it. Now, that's what they did in embalming Joseph, something to that degree. That ought to make you last for 1,000 million years, you know. Put all that wax and everything all over you and take your bowels out and fix it all up and put plastic all over you. And 40 days were fulfilled for him, for so are fulfilled the days of those which are embalmed. And the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days, 70 days, as they did as the Wilkinson says. Wilkinson is a historian. And when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spake unto the house of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found grace in your eyes, speak, I pray you, in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, Lo, I die in my grave which I have digged for me in the land of Canaan. Thou shalt bury me. Where are they going to bury him? Machpelah. That's the cave that Abraham bought to bury his wife Sarah, and where his family is buried. Now therefore let me go up, I pray thee, and bury my father, and I will come again. And Pharaoh said, Go up and bury thy father. What's he talking about? He's talking about leaving Egypt, going all the way to the land of Canaan and burying Jacob, and then coming back to Egypt. Well, what's he thinking about? Why didn't he just stay over here in Canaan? God must have put it in his mind, because God had a purpose for him, didn't he? And all of his brothers came with him. Well, there wasn't much left over here in Canaan. Not only that, Joseph had a purpose over here. Him and all of his brothers go over there to bury their father. They could have stayed. Evidently, God spoke to their hearts somewhat. This is something that's not written in here. So they went to the cave of Machpelah over here, take him from Egypt, go up here into Canaan, go to Machpelah, bury him, and they all go back. You don't even stop and think about that, do you? God has to put it in Joseph's mind, and his brothers are looking to him to take care of him, because he is second in command only to Pharaoh in Egypt, and he literally rules the land. They know they're going to have it easy as long as they follow Brother Joseph. but they're scared. And Pharaoh said, go up and bury thy father according he has made thee to swear. And Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. He had a great procession going to the land of Canaan. Now, all the house of Joseph and his brethren and his father's house, only their little ones and their flocks and their herds they left in the land of Goshen. So that would be one reason to come back, wouldn't it? And they went up with him, both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. And they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond Jordan. And there they mourned with great and sore lamentation. And he made a mourning for his father 7 days. And when the Canaanites of the land, the Canaanites saw the mourning in the floor of Atad, they said, there is a grieving mourning to the Egyptians. They even called Joseph an Egyptian and his brothers. Wherefore the name of it was called Abel Mizraim, which is beyond Jordan, and his sons did unto him according as he commanded them. And his sons carried him into the land of Canaan, and buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which Abraham brought with the field for the possession of a burying place of Ephron the Hittite before Mamre. And Joseph returned to Egypt. See, he was over there in Canaan. He hasn't seen this land since he was a boy, since he was 17 years old, and carried away. He's probably 60-ish here, somewhere in that neighborhood. And all that went with him to bury his father after he had buried his father. Let me read to you a funeral procession, what they went through. First, servants led the way, carrying tables laden with fruit, cakes, flowers, vases of ointment, wine and other liquids, with 3 young geese, a calf for sacrifice, chairs and wooden tablets, napkins. Of course, Joseph is probably going to change the sacrifice. It depends on whether God would permit him to have that calf as a sacrifice. And other things, they did offer bullocks from time to time, which was a calf. Then others followed, bearing daggers, bows, fans, and the mummy cases in which the deceased and his ancestors had been kept previous to burial. Next came a table of offerings, futils, couches, boxes, a chariot. After these, men appeared with gold vases and more offerings. To these succeeded the bearers of a sacred boat. But since Joseph, and the sacred boat was to carry him across the river of death, since Joseph was in charge, no one went with him that had a higher authority than him, so he could change anything in the funeral procession he wanted to. He didn't need a boat to carry his father across the river of death as the pagan Egyptians did. To these succeeded the bearers of a sacred boat and the mysterious eye of Osiris as the god of stability. This is the way they had a funeral procession of Egyptians. So Joseph is going to change whatever he wants to change in it. Placed in the consecrated boat, the hearse containing the mummy of the deceased was drawn by 4 oxen and by 7 men under the direction of a superintendent who regulated the march of the funeral. This is the way a pharaoh would be carried to his tomb. Even when the pyramid of Giza was built, the pharaoh was probably escorted to his tomb in this manner. Behind the hearse followed the male relations and the friends of the deceased, who either beat their breast or gave token of their sorrow for their silence, and solemn stepped as they walked, leaning on their long sticks, and with these the procession closed. And I've read much about how people would bury. In India, there's some of the people that will bury, if a man dies, they'll bury his wife alive with him and his servants alive. In some of the ancient nations in the Far East, they will build a funeral pyre. It's like a bonfire. They'll build a platform and put their people on it, and then they'll make their wife get in the fire, their servants get in the fire with them, and they will be alive while they put them in the fire, because they're going to need the wife in the hereafter, and they're going to need their servants to wait on them in the hereafter. So if you become a wife or a servant, you better hope that you die first, because you have to go with him when he goes. let me just give you this about lamenting. They mourned with great and sore lamentations. We read that. The Egyptians were exceedingly demonstrative. They demonstrated their mourning greatly and vehement in their public lamentations for the dead, rending their garments, smiting on their breasts, throwing dust and mud on their heads, calling on the deceased by name and chanting funeral dirges to the music of a tambourine, and with the tinkling plates removed. They made mourning for their father 7 days. So this is what the Egyptians would do. It's very interesting. Let me give you something about the train of mourners. In an Egyptian funeral, the train consisted of a state and court officials of Pharaoh's house of the land of Egypt. And if you notice, many of these officials went with Joseph. The members of the houses of Joseph and his brethren, and a troop of horsemen and charioteers for protection on the journey. The reason I'm reading this, I want you to realize these are real people, living people. They had these superstitions. They had their ways of living. But Joseph was in charge, and he didn't have to follow everything to the letter. He could readjust it because he was the boss. The line of march. This was either straight north through the country of the Philistines. We're talking about some of the pharaohs. If Goren-Atad was south of Hebron in Judea, well, he's talking about Joseph here, or it was round about the way of the wilderness, the halting place was east of Jordan. The lamentation of Goren-Atad, where he was going through, where the people watched him, this was intended as a special demonstration before burial, and it was conducted with such vehemence as to arrest the attention of the Canaanites. They were marching around, going the long way around, in a few processions to put on a show for the death of the loved one, who called for the place in consequence Abel Mizraim, the plain of the mourning of Mizraim, and so forth. Now, let's finish reading here. Go down here to verse 15. Now, back to his brothers in Egypt. His brothers haven't trusted him when he said, I am Joseph. He said, you don't need to weary yourself, because over there in that 45th chapter, when he reveals himself to them, he says, you don't have to be afraid. Come near me. There in the 4th verse of the 45th chapter, I am Joseph, your brother whom you sold. Don't be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you didn't do this, that you sold me hither. God did the one that did the sending. He said, you did the selling. God did the sending before you to preserve life. He prepared the Ishmaelite caravan. He prepared the jealousy in your mind so this would happen, because he had to put me in Egypt to save much people alive. And I love that verse 8. I love verse 7 and 8. God sent me before you to preserve a posterity in the earth, to save your lives by great deliverance. So now it wasn't you that sent me, but God. So he had to manipulate every evil thought in their minds to sell him. He had to manipulate him to go into Potiphar's house. Whoever bought him had put him in Potiphar's house. He had to manipulate Potiphar to marry the woman he married, so she would be as devious as she was, so that she would think that she could have an affair with Joseph, and God had to make her beautiful enough to think maybe she could have an affair. Since Potiphar was captain of the king's guards, or Pharaoh's guard, then he wouldn't pick some ugly woman in Egypt. He picked out probably one of the most beautiful women in Egypt, and he made Joseph very fair to look upon. In that 39th chapter it says so. So he had to make her that way, and he had to make Joseph handsome enough, and she thought she had a chance with him. And he had to make Joseph so righteous that he would pull away from her, leave her coat there, so that she would claim that he was trying to rape her. He had to put all this in their minds. So Joseph would be thrown in prison in order to read the butler's dream, interpret his dream. So the butler, remember when he come out of prison, when the Pharaoh has a dream, the butler says, oops, I forgot myself. There's a man in prison that can interpret dreams. And that puts Joseph in Egypt for that purpose, so that he can be in charge and his brothers can come over to get grain. If Joseph wasn't in charge and his brothers come over to get grain, what's the hope for him? None. So he's in Egypt, gets to the top of Egypt. Then after the famine's over, he calls his brothers over. They stay there 400 years, and there'll be no law of Moses unless they're there. Will there? And do you believe the law was written by God before the foundation of the world? Not without Joseph being sold into Egypt through the envy of his brothers. But his brothers don't quite believe him. You see, Joseph has more faith than they do, and it grieves him that they haven't believed him already. And when Joseph's brethren saw that their father was dead, they said, perhaps Joseph was going to hate us. He's probably only been treating us right. This really grieves Joseph. He weeps over this, that his brother hasn't believed him. They still don't trust him. I've had people come to this church. I've gone out of my way. I've given them money. I've paid their car payment. I've paid their house payment. I've paid their, I don't mean I have, the ministry's paid it. The ministry's been generous enough to help them with bills, with electric bills, and they've walked away. That Jim Brown, he thinks he knows everything, and I'm as smart as he is. Well, maybe you are, but you're not the pastor here. And I can't believe you broke my heart this way. They don't really believe that I'm a godly man, that I'm trying to teach the truth. I don't even understand it, because I love you while you're walking away slapping me. It's very heartbreaking to be giving your all, 100% of everything you are, 24 hours a day. I didn't do that when I was young. I was into myself. It's heartbreaking for dear, dear brothers to look at you like, you're not better than me. I asked Mike one time, I said, why do you think these people do that? He said, envy. I want what Jim's got. Whew. Getting to this point was like going to hell about 500 times. Just surrendering over to God. It took 56 years of studying the Bible to be able to do on the board what I just did. I speak foolishly. I didn't learn that one day. You think you can learn that in 10 years? You're wrong. You might learn it quicker if you sit here and listen to me for 10 years. You got an edge I didn't have. I had no one teaching me. No one. My father didn't know enough Bible to fill up a thimble. And all the preachers I ever knew didn't. And I traveled all over America and sang and preached in hundreds of churches across America, and none of them knew anything. I didn't get my books out and break the Bible. I wouldn't have had anything. You really want to, it's like old Dr. Roy Kemp said. He said, a guy in the class said, Dr. Kemp, how do you know so much? And Dr. Kemp was a gentle soul, just gentle as he could be. He'd spew out history 100 miles an hour. He said, well, boy, if you'll go home and study, just break the books open every night for 50 years, you'll be as smart as me. Real simple. That's all you got to do. And I'll say with Dr. Kemp, if you'll go home, break open those books for 56 years, you'll be able to do this. It's not so much that I'm smarter than anybody else, because I don't believe I am. I have the most unbelievable amount of perseverance of anybody I've ever been around. I will persevere. I'll do stuff when I don't feel like doing it. I'll do it because I know it's good for me. Do this, Jim Brown. You understand? All right, I'll do it. Come on. If you persevere, you can do so many things that you don't have any idea. I don't think I've got a higher IQ than most people. I've got an unbelievable amount of perseverance. I will do till I die. I'll go down with the ship every time. If you can pray for God for perseverance, that's called faithfulness. And it's required in stewards that a man be found faithful, not that he be found intelligent and brilliant. That's all you need. Get into death to self daily. Force yourself to turn the TV off. Force yourself to read. Don't try to find 2 hours to read every night. Find 20 minutes here, 15 minutes here, 10 minutes here. I carry a pad and paper around the house writing on it all the time. I got so many notes I need typed up. I just write notes constantly. I write 4 and 5, 6, 8 pages. I pick up a book everywhere I go in the house. I've always got a book. I got all over the den. I got walls full of books and bedrooms full of books and floor to ceiling. And I go in there like a kid in a candy store. I hadn't looked at this in a while. Let me look at that. Go in there and sit down. I read a few paragraphs. Let me look at this, and I feel like, let me take a look at this sucker. I like this one. It's magnificent to have, if you have the tools, you can learn a lot of things. If you got If you're going to spend $40,000 on a brand new automobile, don't do that. Go buy a library. That car will be worth $10,000 in 5 years. The library will be a treasure that you will never get over, and I'll help you with the books to buy. Besides that, you buy the $40,000 car. You drive off the curb at the dealership, boom, and it loses $5,000 immediately. Boom, you've lost five. Oh gosh! If you could have a register right at the odometer, $5,000 minus $5,000, just like that. Boom, as you drive away. You can drive it back on the lot, and they're not going to give you what you paid for it. Just as soon as you drive off the lot. Hey, I decided I want this tough. It's yours. What do you give me for it? $35,000. I just paid $40,000 10 minutes ago. Too bad. It's used. And that's the truth, isn't it? That's the truth. Well, how much time do I have? 2 minutes. And they sent a messenger to Joseph saying, yeah, 1 minute. I lost a minute. They sent a messenger unto Joseph saying, thy father did command before he died, saying, they're lying. Our father commanded you, Joseph, so shall you say unto Joseph. Now, sons, 11 sons, go tell Joseph, forgive you. You tell him I told to forgive you. I pray thee now, the trespass of your brethren. You think Jacob's going to lay there in bed and say, you tell your brother I said to forgive you. It shows you how little faith they had and how much he had, and that's why it grieves him for their sin, and they did unto thee evil. And now we pray thee, forgive the trespasses of the servants of God for thy father. And they told Joseph, and he wept. Joseph wept. He went, you don't believe me? I told you God did the sending. He manipulated your minds. And he's weeping as he's looking at him. Don't you understand? It shows you the weakness of his brothers. They were all older than him except one. That was Benjamin. And Joseph wept when they spake these words to him. It just broke his heart. They didn't have any belief in him. And it really breaks a man's heart. I've got a section from a commentary. They feared Joseph wept when they spake unto him. They wept for them, wept to think that they did not yet understand him. It is grief to a good man, a man of large, simple, loving nature, to be thought capable of unkindness and treachery. That's what I said a while ago. Breaks my heart for these people I have loved to think that I can be so treacherous. If you listen to gossip, people can convince you that I have said and done and believed things that I don't believe. I care about the sheep. I love all of them. I won't even let my wife say a gossipy word. If I discuss anybody's problems with her, which is the shepherd's private right to do, I'll say, don't you dare look at this in the wrong way. I'm talking to you so that you'll understand I got a problem I need to help people with. I won't let anybody start gossiping. When I hear the tone of your voice turn, I say, whoa. I've done that to many of you here. Don't say that. Not in that tone of voice. I won't let you gossip about each other around me, and I don't gossip about anybody when you're not around me. I say good things about the people here. I like to brag on the people here. I like to lift them up to others, and most of you have heard me do that. And it broke his heart. It is so great grief to a man of large, simple, loving nature, and I consider God has dealt with me over the years. I know when I wasn't a man of large, loving nature. And God has put that in me over these last years. To be taught capable of unkindness and treachery, Joseph recognized that his life had been a divine thing. And I recognize that my life has been a divine thing since God has turned me around at 40 years old in the hospital. He was only an instrument in the hands of God, in the place of God. He saw providence working with grace. The influence of real religion is to sanctify and exalt natural affections. Joseph's end, like his father's, was a testimony to the faithfulness of God and fresh consecration of the covenant people to their divine future. That's the way I feel. I love that sentence there. It is a great grief to a good man, You will know when you start living godly. You'll know that. God will so beat you and turn you upside down. You'll say, I'm committing my life to Him. I'm going to stop all gossip, all treachery. That's not going to go on in here. And it breaks my heart that people have left here and thought that much of me. I don't understand it. I have wept. I have cried over it. I have loved people and they have backbited and hurt me and backstabbed, and I have done nothing. I've asked Mary, what did I do? She said, nothing. You just be what you are. Look at all the men in the scriptures. What did David do? Nothing. And Saul wanted to kill him. It was David's idea to be anointed king of Israel, was it? David said, who am I to be king of Israel, to be the son-in-law to a king? I am no one. Moses said the same thing. Who am I that God would call me? That's what God wants from you. Who am I? Not, it's time for me to be up front. That's not what He wants. I'm out of time. We'll come back and we'll finish this and start into Exodus. Let's pray. Father, thank you for truth. Thank you for your word. Strengthen the flock. I'm just here to do your will. Give me strength and cause me to study more and to write more and to do the things I should be doing. Lord, I love the sheep. I love the flock with all my heart and soul, regardless of who they are, what they've done to me or in the church. Let them know that wherever they are. Sometimes I lose my temper, Lord. Pray I never do that again. Forgive me where I failed. God will praise you for all things. Cause us to be like Joseph and faithful to you. Lead us to your elect. Open up many doors for the ministry, and we will continue to believe you, glorify you. Just give us strength. Help the part of us that don't believe. Help thou mine unbelief. Lead us to your elect. Open up opportunities for this ministry. Lord, you know I'm willing and ready to say whatever needs to be said, and we'll give you praise for everything. In Christ's name, amen.
Yeah. So, people that look, and they went to hell. They went to hell. So, in other words, the people 20 years old and upward,
they didn't believe God. I don't know. I'm not going to say where they went.
okay.
There could be rebellious people that God kills like He did Saul, and Saul was the anointed of God. God brought him to the place of death.
Didn't Saul kill like 24 priests of God?
That's right. He killed 85 priests of God. 85 priests of God. It's something else, isn't it?
Yeah. Troy gave me this shirt a long time ago.
I don't care if it's big. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
It says the right. Oops. I saw a tattoo. Deplane. That's what I think of when I think of tattoo. Is anything wrong with tattoo saying deplane? I don't
And I
think so.
told you today, people are now getting them for the medical reasons. They're putting that medical, the
Yeah.
live symbol.
I'm not putting my approval on it, but that is so silly when people will put that down when they won't put out false teachers.
Yeah.
Oh, I got these people with tattoos. We need to get them out of the church. How about getting Kenneth Copeland out of the church? How about getting Billy Graham out of the
I think
church?
Kelly got it.
Well, that's their business. I don't care.
Romans 9.
I don't care. That's fine. That's fine with me. It doesn't, those things don't mean what people say.
Yeah.
I don't care. What we need to do is tattoo the whole church. You're required to put a tattoo right up here.
I don't have a tattoo,
This
but
is
I got a
God.
birthmark that God gave me.
Okay. Well, you got to get rid of that. Looks like a tattoo. Tattoo. Deplane. You know, I never did watch an episode of Fantasy Island. I just knew tattoo, and I knew deplane. That's all I knew about it. It's funny. He committed suicide.
Which one?
Tattoo.
Oh,
I'm not talking about on the show. I'm